saying that for Beau's Afraid, they should just handed out shrooms beforehand. I think it would have helped the box office numbers.
Yep, that went over my head. Definitely went
Right.
over my head.
Oh man, it looks like I'm a little high level for you. Maybe I went a little bit Ari Aster on you because I felt like this movie was a bit over my head at times as
I
well.
I was gonna say I think this movie put me enough in a mental pretzel where I just can't think straight. And it's been 3 days since we've seen this movie. I still can't think straight.
Yeah, in the biz, we call this movie a mind. This is a movie that is coming from A24, the highest budget for an A24 movie ever. And it's coming after like the established success of Ari Aster with the studio, right? Director of Hereditary, Midsommar. He was basically unhinged in this movie. He was given free reign, at least what it appears to be. And I wanted to talk about, like, we'll go into the Rotten Tomatoes, the IMDb, but a lot of like topic of conversation has to go with cinema score for this movie, Ricky Flex. Do you know what cinema score is all about?
Well, yeah, but I don't really know what the score is for this movie.
Yeah, but like I'm just to inform the audience, cinema score, it's like the anticipation for the movie, what your expectations are, and then like your reactions afterwards. And people have been talking about this being the very rare F for a
F.
movie. Yeah, so it's
Oh my god.
when you go to an Ari Aster movie with Joaquin Phoenix, you have certain expectations. You have a historically successful horror director, and then you end up with what we got with Beau is Afraid, which we'll dive into a sec. But I guess that dives right into our expectations here, Ricky Flicks. Did this fail your expectations? Did it meet them or even exceed them?
Okay, F is really dramatic. This movie I thought did not meet my expectations whatsoever. Not even close. But it wasn't like it was a failure. This movie wasn't a failure. To put an F as a cinema score is very harsh. It's not definitely not a masterpiece. It's nothing like, for the most part, nothing like Midsommar, Hereditary, Ari Aster's prior works. It's not a horror, or I guess Midsommar. It's a horror, I guess. Yeah, I'll call it a horror, even though I don't like to use a horror on like the
It's a
psychological thriller.
daytime horror. It's very
Yeah,
unconventional.
yeah, unconventional horror, I would say for that one. Hereditary, definitely, I would say a horror, just not a jump scare horror, which me and you don't particularly love. This movie's more like just a dark comedy. This is more of a comedy, and yes, we'll talk about Odyssey, epic 3-hour runtime adventure movie journey. But at the end of the day, this is a comedy, and I think it hit home with that. But I think what we were expecting was like a critical arc, complete arc overall, and this movie did not do that whatsoever, at least in my opinion.
And it's interesting you say an arc because I feel like with a movie that has so many connections to the Odyssey and old school storytelling, we should see like a development of especially a character played by Joaquin Phoenix. And Ari Aster has talked about Joaquin being someone he's always wanted to work with. He views him as the greatest living actor from an interview I was listening from Ari Aster. Yet he's pretty one note this entire time. And despite this 3-hour runtime, I feel like we end up with the same character that we started with. And that's one of my beasts with the movie. But I also told you when we were leaving the theater, I could see this being one that like university study, right? They show like the second act of this movie in a film class, and they say what was the influences or the homages that Ari Aster was paying tribute to. It just felt like it was like a great cinephile movie for like parts of it. The first part, I would say, it was just hilarious. Like it was honestly, I think I told you afterward, that might have been the funniest movie I've seen all year. And it's like a bunch of parts where I could like almost recite back, right? If we were doing spoilers and like just I'd cackle thinking about it. And then like it has like I talk about the second act, a little bit boring in my eyes. Then the third act just kind of goes off the walls and it's kind of unsatisfactory for audiences. Let's dive into the Rotten Tomatoes. Let's hit the IMDb. We'll hit the synopsis and then we're off and running. So critically, Beau is Afraid is hitting a 68%. And then audience score is 75%. IMDb, it's hitting a 7.4 out of 10. That's low for a Ari Aster film for out of the 3 that he's done with A24. Synopsis reads, a paranoid man embarks on an epic odyssey. There's that word again. To get home to his mother in this bold and ingeniously depraved new film from Ari Aster. So, Ricky Flex, I mentioned how this is the highest budget in the history of A24. We had a deep dive. Make sure you go listen to it from last week on, right, the hottest studio in Hollywood, right? Like the independent studio that doesn't feel too independent. It has that cool factor. They went all in, right, with Beau is Afraid. Do you think this was a wise decision, seeing that the box office opening weekend hit $2.7 million? Do you think they made the right decision, or does this just amplify what almost like the thesis is for A24?
I think this is a little bit of a setback for A24 and their methodology. I think because this was an ambitious and bold project. All right. And we talked about it, A24 giving that creative freedom to these auteur directors. And Ari Aster is definitely an auteur filmmaker for sure. This film for sure shows that. But I think for this one, it showed A24 still has misses in its bag, especially big budget misses that had me reminded of like a Netflix vibe. And I think I mentioned it to you when we were leaving the theater, where this one, it seemed to me where it leans too much on the creative freedom, not enough in the production by A24. And I think that was a mistake. And I think that Ari Aster had his hands all over this and a little bit too self-indulgent in this film. And I think the reins need to be pulled in a little bit. And it wasn't, and I'm not talking about like the directorial choices. I'm more just talking about the plot and overall script. I just think that behind the scenes, before you start making this movie, you could have A24 help and just kind of make this a little leaner and make it less boring throughout, and particularly in the back half of this movie. And I think A24 just gave too much freedom, similar to like what Netflix has done over the years. And I think it was kind of a setback for them for their biggest budget they've ever given out.
Right. And I wrote this question down in the document. Who is this movie for? Is it for like Ari Aster kind of project his experiences and with his family's relationship to his mother, or is the point to entertain audiences? And that's where it becomes like we hear all these stories, or we hear these like directors that are given these unlimited budgets, and if they're non-IP, they're kind of going balls to the wall and maximizing every single budget that they have to create, right, very personal stories. But I think what we're noticing in Hollywood, right, there, and Ari Aster talked about this in an interview I was listening to. He wants to treat every movie like it's his last, right? But he's a big enough name where he's going to get another chance. But this turns into like, okay, you're going a little bit too hard here. Is it actually going to hurt the chances of you making your next film, right? Is it too personal where audiences don't connect with it whatsoever, that you lose that fan base that was very strong after Hereditary and Midsommar? Did you feel that at all? Do you think this is hurting him after this movie because it's such a separation of what we saw from his first two films? And this one feels like almost like what Chazelle did with Babylon, where he put all his chips in this movie, right? And then it bombs at the box office. Audiences aren't going to see it whatsoever. They're not engaging. Is this going to hurt his career rather than like, he's a young director, propel it forward and doing like that Western that he plans on doing with Joaquin Phoenix? Like, is that now in jeopardy?
Yeah, I think I did think of Damien Chazelle, and I think it's just this new era of Hollywood, and particularly directors and this new era of auteur filmmakers, where they're the writer and director of their movies, with Chazelle. And I was thinking a lot of Robert Eggers as well. The Northman, $100 million budget, did not do well at the box office as well, similar to Babylon and this movie. Is where these younger filmmakers are treating these movies like they do two movies. They show that, yep, they're one of the best working. They're young Hollywood darlings, and they earn that third big movie. And this one is different than I think Chazelle or The Northman, where this budget is 66% less, 35 million compared to 100 plus million budget. And I think that Ari Aster, he already has the other one greenlit, so I think he's going to be okay. Chazelle is going to be okay, even though he doesn't have a project lined up. He's won an Oscar. He's going to be okay. And then obviously Eggers is going to be okay because he already has a movie that's already in production. So At the end of the day, they'll be okay. This is so early. He's like 36, 35. All these the directors I mentioned, they're all in their 30s, mid 30s. They have so many years ahead of them. I think they'll be okay. I just think that
Mm.
now, the past 2 years, post COVID, I think these studios are going to start like realizing, especially looking at Netflix and their failures, that they need to be more selective with their money. They need to be either more selective or they need to have their hands on a little more. And I think that could be helpful or also detrimental. And I think for
Mhm.
this case, it could have been helpful for a studio like A24 where we know they won't be too hands-on. But if they even were a little hands-on, like they were in other projects that they've done, I think that could have been extremely helpful. So I think it's a little push and pull, but overall for these directors, particularly Ari Aster, I think they'll be just fine.
I think A24 isn't hurt too severely by this. They might second guess like green lighting something and being so hands off. I know with our deep dive, we talked about how they are producers more than just distributors. They want to be collaborators on these projects and they're selective with what they choose. And this is a very bold movie, like visually very striking. And then the story itself, it's like you can't see a major studio saying yes to like this whole premise that is lasting a 3-hour runtime with Ari Aster and Joaquin Phoenix at the center of it the entire time. Like they would say, okay, let's make this 2 hours. And Ari Aster's like, I can't get my whole vision. Who's going to do this? A24 will. But it's the fact that it's A24. It's their highest budget, but $35 million to make a movie isn't too much in 2023. And I also see like the directors' perspectives in their 30s here because I think they're young enough to actually understand what the trajectory of Hollywood is and how non-IP movies like they may not be around too much for the cinema experience. So they want to get it done now before they're being forced to either do an IP project or have their movie or go to a streaming service or force their idea into TV. So while we always like think about like, hey, we're getting kind of sick of them going balls to the wall for a movie that no one sees. It's a shame because like sometimes they're good, sometimes they're overindulgent and audiences are really turned off by them. But I do see that perspective where even if they're that young, who knows if they're going to be able to have their vision on the big screen anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioning the Ari Aster comment where like he treats every film like his last. So I would do the same thing. You never
Yeah.
know.
Oh yeah.
Like I love that. And like for like this movie, not my favorite. Definitely my least favorite Ari Aster movie. Um, not one that we'll revisit in the top billing of best movies of the year. For me, I'll say that for me. But I love how he went for it.
Yeah.
I
Let's
love
talk about
that.
it.
That's what we want, right? We want Chazelle to go for it. I still claim that the first hour of Babylon was the best thing of last year that I saw,
Mm-hmm.
and I stand by that. And I love how he went for it. I didn't particularly love the movie as I thought I would, but that first hour will always have that. And like The Northman, great movie. Boring at times, but great movie. I love how he went for it, but obviously extremely unsuccessful, not only at the box office, but didn't get an Academy Award. So at the end of the day, we're gonna have our misses, but we need our auteur filmmakers to keep pushing the limits and keep being their creative, wacky selves in order to push the limits. Because if we don't, then we get MCU Phase 4 for Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we can't have, or else we won't have a podcast.
Right. And A24, they let him cook, right? We'll see how like the second weekend does. And this movie also, it's like it might not be living well right now. It might not be received well right now. But like as I said before, this seems like a movie that like people are going to be analyzing for a long time with the decisions that are made, what it was truly about, the homages that are made to it. But similar to Babylon, I loved the first 30 minutes of this movie. It was so unpredictable. And you talk about the idea of like committing to a story. This is a story on anxiety, PTSD, trauma, family trauma. And I think it really put you in the shoes of someone that has anxiety. I think that might have been the point of the movie, although I'm not quite sure yet. I might need another decade to try and figure that out. Um, but when we are in that world, we are in Beau's world the entire time. Like there is like this is like a Charlie Kaufman script on acid. This is like balls to the wall where it's like there's never a snap back to reality in this movie. Like when you're walking the street through Beau's apartment, you got people, you got dead bodies in the street that no one's paying attention to. You got the people dancing naked. You got murders happening right in front. And then he goes into his apartment, and you think like, okay, there's going to be some irony going on here where we are going to snap back to right reality. We're going to look at that street, and everything's going to be every day. Everything's going to be daily routine, but it never does. Like the movie, it just remains on a 12 of absurdity and doesn't let on the gas. If anything, by the third act, it ratchets up to a 15. So in that regard, he does that for 3 hours. Like and it also held my attention, engaged me the entire time. I know I had to use the bathroom first like 20 minutes in, and I didn't want to go because like I was laughing so much. It was so unpredictable. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And then I finally left and I go use the bathroom. And this is a minor spoiler here. I come back and I go back to Ricky Flex sitting in the top row. We're seeing it in IMAX, right? Widescreen, looks great, sounds great. And then I say, hey, did I miss anything? And Ricky's like, not much. Just like he ran naked in the street, got hit by a car, got stabbed 30 times. Now he's and he decided not to go to the hospital. And now he's in some stranger's house. I'm like, what?
I did not say not
what?
Much.
What?
I did not say not much.
Okay, maybe I'll cut that a little bit for the review for the YouTube and everything.
You don't need to cut it. You could just say I didn't say that.
But you did say
I was laughing
20 times.
I was laughing because I didn't know how to because I felt terrible for you because you missed. I feel like a crucial scene. I was just like,
and it was funny.
Oh my god! And it was funny. I couldn't say it, because I was laughing. I was still laughing while trying to tell you because it was hilarious because they didn't show the entire thing. It was a part of it was a flashback too. You have to see it. Great scene. And I think a part of that is I agree with you. This movie was probably the funniest movie that's come out so far this year in 4 months. Very funny. And for stuff like that, there's some quirky things that's just so genius. Quick things. Doesn't mean a lot, but
Easter eggs
so
everywhere.
Funny. And it helps you're as an audience member viewing this movie. But then also to hit home another thing you said, I totally agree with you as well. Similar to Babylon, the first hour of this movie, I loved it. I really liked it. And instead of we usually talk about the first, second, and third acts, I guess if we had to break it down to acts, the first act was definitely the most effective for me. But I kind of view this movie in 4 parts because of the 4 settings. There's 4 settings that this movie's in.
Yeah.
And the first half of this movie, the first act, I guess, him trying to leave that apartment, and then the suburbs, I thought were so good. And not only from a performances standpoint and supporting characters, which were great. Amy Ryan and Nathan Lane were great as well. But I just thought this world, we didn't learn why this world was like this. And I didn't care. I just loved how intense it was, how wild it was, the madness, how fun, by far the funniest. And it kept you being curious. And throughout the entire of these two settings. And I thought it was extremely effective. And that's where I was like, wow, this movie, I understand this Odyssey type adventure journey and this anxious guy that's kind of controlled by his mom, even though no spoilers, I'm not going to say anything, but even though something happens where it's should you still be controlled? It's yeah, but he is. And that's just who he is. But then the second half just falters from there. And I was just very disappointed because that first act, the first half of the movie, those 2 settings were again, I'll use the word again, effective. It was very, I liked it a lot. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. I think it's just something about the way he set it up, right? Where he is someone who's suffering from anxiety, and then he has to take these pills, and this goes into the beginning of, can we rely on Joaquin as a narrator in this movie? But no, we are in Beau's mind the entire time. I think that what they did to structure that, to plan it out, I thought was brilliant. And I think another thing they did, when I was listening to Ari Aster talk about this, when they casted the supporting characters here, people like Nathan Lane, you talked about Amy Ryan, but also Patti LuPone as his mother, right? So you have these theater type of performers that are loud, right? That are very much in your face. And this is a guy who is literally afraid the entire time. He's timid and he's just shrieking in different levels, on different octaves the entire time with Joaquin's performance. It had the makings to fit this anxiety themed movie. I thought that was brilliant. And I think the performances, I think on the supporting cast, I was actually more impressed with than Joaquin himself. And I think we could kind of like slide on over to that a little bit. Like Joaquin, how do you think he did in this film?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like it did feel like that. Like the rambunctious, outgoing people around Joaquin, where like if Joaquin's character Beau was a normal guy, you would still recognize like, oh, he's not an introvert, but he's not necessarily an extrovert. But then everyone around them is just an extrovert because they're theater actors, Broadway actors. Like that, I think that's a great point. As regards to Joaquin, I thought it was really good. He was a great casting for this. Just like, if you look at his prior work, he's great at acting crazy, yet also acting very shy and introvert. You think it's like a combination of the master and her, you definitely could see how he could play like a damaged, vulnerable person, like
Mhm.
that's anxious and kind of a beta, but still has that presence to command a 3-hour runtime of a movie.
Oh yeah.
So I thought he was pretty one note, but very good.
Mhm.
I wouldn't put this in his top 5, I think. I wouldn't, but it was a great performance, I would say.
He was like a 3-point specialist. He's like Mike Miller, and he went like 6 for 8, in game 6 of the finals. That's what it felt like. And he was just like, and for the most part, he was great. It worked. Okay. He did his job, but it was good at that one thing. And did you hear like on the set of this movie, Joaquin, what he would do in between takes?
Was it that he would yell?
Yeah, he would just scream
Yeah.
randomly to stay in character. And that's what he did for a lot of this movie. He was speaking very lowly and he's not confident in himself. And he nails that vibe so well. But then the loudest you'll hear him talk is when he's starting to elevate his voice to his mother, but then his mother will just like sit him down again and then he'll just scream out of shock. Like he played that perfectly. And I think this
Brian
movie.
Cox would not like him on set,
Oh yeah. Oh, would not at all. I think he would still prefer Joaquin over Jeremy Strong, though. To be honest,
which is crazy.
judging by the interviews that we've listened to and read, and I think Joaquin was actually perfect for this movie because he can hold the screen. He doesn't have to have unlimited dialogue, and he's great at playing loners, whether it be Arthur Fleck in Joker, whether it be Spike Jonze's Her, whether it be You Were Never Really Here. He is great at being on his own. And that's why, like, I don't know if this works with anyone else, like to this level. I think it could have gone south, and I think we have a comfortability with him being alone on screen. And he just acts so differently than everyone else. He is an outsider himself. He seems like someone who's always claimed he's like ostracized by society, things like that.
Right.
And like when Ari
Talking
Aster,
about like goat milk, like milking
yeah,
goats or
just like,
whatever.
but like Ari Aster, you could tell he's a weird brain because like in the interview I was listening to, he was saying why he loved Joaquin, and he said he's one of the greatest artists of his generation. He said he's the greatest living actor. But like one of the things he cited on that he loves so much about him from his filmography is I'm Still Here, with the mockumentary directed by Casey Affleck on Joaquin Phoenix when he quit acting and wanted to become
Right.
a rapper. It's just like that's why he wanted Joaquin Phoenix. It seems like this is a perfect pairing because they're two odd brains, right? They're two really weird guys, and this was a freaking wild movie. And even though it was wild, it was weird. You could tell Ari Aster has so much skill, and he knows so much about films. The second act of this movie, like I said, it just felt like the animated sequences, how beautiful it looked. Like he's probably like taking pieces from animators that like we have never heard of, even hardcore cinephiles might have heard of faintly. It just seems like it's one that could be overanalyzed time and time again. But when the third act came, I'll let you talk in one sec. But the third act came, my simple brain, I began to think, is this just like an anxiety-induced, horror-filled 40-year-old virgin? That's what I kept on thinking the entire time. I'm
Oh
like,
my god.
but isn't that kind of what it felt like going into the
Yeah,
third act?
I love that comp. Wow. Didn't think of that. I'm mad that I didn't because it was staring at us literally.
Yeah, it's
And
just like this guy is a weirdo. He doesn't get along with anybody. Doesn't never had any physical connection. There's even jokes made throughout that he's never had the physical connection, but it's just in a horror setting. It's like if you just switch out Judd Apatow with Ari Aster, this is what you get.
yeah, I love that analogy. But like going back to the greatest living actor. By the way, I've been saying that. You know that I've been saying Joaquin, like low key, might be the greatest living actor today. But like the thing where like I'm a big Leo guy. Okay, Leo, like the problem with Leo, why like my argument against myself of why he wouldn't be the best living actor right now is that he could never do this. He can't play these roles.
Oh no.
Like
Oh
he
no.
just you can't do it versus like a De Niro
It's too
or
bold.
a Joaquin can. You know,
Yeah.
they can
He has
go the full
balls.
spectrum. Like a Christian Bale, he could probably do this
He
role
could
as
do it.
well, but not as well as Joaquin. I think, like you know what I mean. Like they could do the full spectrum. Those actors versus like a Leo can't. And it's nothing against Leo. It's just like when you grow up as a teenage heartthrob in the 90s, Basketball Diaries, and then you go to Titanic, it's kind of hard to come back from that. And you always got to be like a likable character or not like a Tom Hanks wise, but like someone that's like easy to look at and just completely different. He can't be like acting too crazy. Like the craziest he's ever been in a movie is probably like Django. like,
Yeah.
that's just like a cool villain role, you know? So that's why Joaquin, like him, De Niro, like I just have major respect to because they could do the full spectrum.
I would even argue Leo couldn't have done Arthur Fleck. He couldn't have been Joker, even though people wanted him to be.
He was
Scorsese was like
rumored.
executive producing and everything. But I think Joaquin was still the better decision, even though you want
Agreed.
to see like Leo play the Joker. But like it just doesn't fit. Like Joaquin is the wacko weirdo that makes weird decisions with his movies. That's why him and Ari Aster, they seem to have an like affinity for one another, especially with this new movie coming up from Ari Aster. You said it's already been greenlit on this Western that he wants to make with Joaquin Phoenix, right, at the center of it. And you know it's not going to be conventional. You know it's going to be a little bit off the walls. And that's what we want. That's what we expect. And there were moments of this movie that were just like, man, this is perfect. Like this, it just feels right. But then there's like, we mentioned like the second part of this movie, I felt it was a little bit boring. It felt like a lot of these, we talk about how long this movie is, how maximalist it feels. There are some moments of this film that just carry on for 25 minutes that I didn't care about. Especially like the play scene in the second act of this movie, and just it might have been like, I guess you wanted the third chapter, if you will, like you were referring to it before. And it's just something where I looked at you, I'm like, how long have we been looking at the screen for and like nothing's happened? It's been like literally
That was
25
the turning
minutes.
point in the movie where it got boring.
I think people are watching that movie, and that might be the moment where they kind of turned on it, where
Yeah.
it says, "This, I'm no longer here," and then the third act comes. Like you hinted at the third act doesn't really work for you. You didn't like the ending. Without spoilers, can you just like share why?
Uh, like that's such a hard question without spoilers, but like
You have 2
I'll just
minutes.
say okay. Yeah, 2 minutes. Starts to fade right from that story.
Mhm.
Great animation, by the way, but like just way too long. And it started complicating itself. And this is where the script starts to fall apart a little bit. You get stuff with his father. Um, you have all these like intense scenes, but then like what the F is going on?
Yeah, a
And
few of those.
overall, it felt like therapy sessions throughout that third act that didn't come to a proper conclusion that was like sufficient. And it gave the film like in this world leeway with that creative boldness and its vision that it just wasn't enough for me to overlook. And I think I have in my notes actually, it's funny that you said Charlie Kaufman. I literally said if you gave Charlie Kaufman this idea or this script to like run through, I think this movie would be like my favorite movie of the year. I think he would be able
Mhm.
to control this chaos of this third act and make it into having some themes hit home and make this wacky, weird world hit home a little more subtly.
It did feel
And
like he lost control
yeah,
almost.
and then it would come together in a more coherent way, but it didn't. All right, I like that he went for it. And then the final thing I'll say, I think I'm over my 2 minutes, but the CGI and the
Oh
final
yeah.
scene, without spoilers, was atrocious.
Yeah.
That's I was walking down the theater and just made me angry because the entire movie and Ari Aster, his cinematographer, I cannot pronounce it. I think it's Polish, but like Porgolzeski, he's done all his movies. He's gonna do the Western movie. I think it starts shooting this summer. He's a great cinematographer. Ari Aster, great director, great camera work. And this final scene was pissing me off. I thought it was the only mistake, directorially and cinematography wise, in the entire movie. So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents or two
I,
minutes.
there are parts of the third act I really like. I still thought it was almost just as funny as the first act in a lot of different ways. It's a lot darker in terms of the comedy in the third act. And it got really, really weird. And we thought the first act was weird. Like I said before, it went from a 12 out of 1 out of 10. The first act was at a 12. This one ratcheted up to a 15. And I kind of hinted at this before. The reason I didn't like the ending of this movie without any spoilers, we go on this long journey with Beau, right? He's going through these different places, these different settings, and he's basically the same the entire time. Then there's this meeting that he has in the final act. And by the end of this film, he is the same person that we started with. And when Ari Aster compares like his film, like he did when he was promoting it to like Lord of the Rings, and you think about like the journeys and the transformation those characters go on after like a 3-movie arc. When you're talking about Beau's arc, it's a straight line. It's a flat line, man. Like he passed away like 10 minutes ago. And it's just like, it's a flat line on the radar. He never changes
No
in this
development.
movie. Right. And that's why I think the weakness is the writing, and he cared more about the visuals, okay? The adaptations how his thoughts are being conceived on screen. And that's where I'm thinking, what was the point of this? And that's where I also was thinking, like, Ari Aster, like he might have issues like when he was growing up, and he was kind of like venting through it or kind of playing it through this film, because the anxiety and like the relationship to his mother, like family not understanding, right? Mental illness, right? Not having a wider lens and things like that. That's what I think like he was going for. But as I said previously, like I kind of don't know, and that's why people are saying like, oh, I can't connect with this movie. I can still like understand what you're trying to say. This one I'm just kind of confused why, like you're talking about it, but what are you trying to say about like anxiety? Just that it exists and that it's not curable? Is that what we're going for?
Yeah,
Like
or
that's
like child dependency on their mother or
and how like
parent.
if it's not there. So that's basically my issue, because I can't tell him that he's actually trying to say something rather than just saying, hey, this happens and this is like something I might have been a victim of or someone else's.
Right, and I think you have a good, like, interesting point where, like, it felt like this could have been a thoughtful character arc. It had those themes, like I just said, the child dependency, the anxiety, but this just felt repetitive and unending. The story
Mhm.
was never gonna end, and it was just sometimes exhausting and just repetitive. And that's why I feel like a Charlie Kaufman would have just like would have been able to lean this out and put it together, these themes into a comprehensive story and a character development that could have been very effective. And I
Mhm.
just don't think this was. And I think the ending really hit home on that it was just a flat line, like you said. I think
Yeah,
it's a
so
good
it's just
analogy.
it just overemphasizes how he was feeling at the beginning of the movie. It just confirmed it rather than
It,
like, "Oh, this is how I now feel." It's like, no,
yeah,
he's just the same guy.
it's like he got lost in like all his homages to like other films and all the other like directorial decisions he made and all these other scenes and how long those scenes were. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it felt like he maybe got caught up in other aspects of the movie rather than the actual story
Maybe
arc of the
maybe
main
maybe
character.
maybe that's why we don't think as much about this performance from Joaquin either. Like, we just don't have that satisfactory ending for his character. Therefore, it's like, oh, yeah, I guess he was good. He's one note, but he was good. Before we
Mm,
kind of go into scores, I want to shout out the soundtrack. The needle drops in this movie were pretty good.
yeah,
It was pretty good. I'm not gonna do any spoilers because I think like if you were following the promotion of this movie, the premiere, you saw who was at that premiere. There's a very, very interesting scene regarding this famous pop singer's music, and it's one I
wild.
think people will be talking about it like in the next couple of weeks, and maybe we'll bring it up on a later podcast. All right, scores, Ricky Flex. Who wants to go first? You want to go?
I also just wanna mention good cameo in this movie. There's a
Yeah.
good cameo, really funny.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to mention
I
that.
didn't see that coming at all. I was like, "What the hell? What's
Yeah, did
happening?
not see that.
Where's the relationship here? Why is this
Yeah,
person here?"
I don't know, but I think I do know one might be. I potentially know a reason, but it would be a spoiler if I'd
I
say it.
hope that person is in the next Ari Aster movie with Joaquin Phoenix.
I could that would be interesting.
Yeah,
That would be pretty cool.
that would be. What'd you score though?
The tough one. I when I was watching the movie, I was thinking like, is this a DNR? Do not like or do not score
I feel
DNS?
like I gotta see it again too, but I'll give a first like
Yeah,
initial score.
similar vibes to Babylon, but I'm still gonna give the nod to Babylon. I'm gonna give this a 63.
Okay. Wow, I'm lower than you. I'm going with a 53. 53 from Dr. O. And that's disappointing because this is like an installment from a director I really like. And it was him like trying to do something different, trying to
Right.
expand the filmography. So we had high hopes and we love Joaquin. So that score hurts. But I'm going to reserve myself for a revised score when I see it a second time because I'm going to need multiple viewings of this movie.
I
I might even go in theaters again. I was talking
I
to my friends like, hey, you guys
yeah.
might like this. And I think it's a little wacky. And
Good in IMAX.
yeah,
Besides the CGI scene.
I might give it a run again. And that's like one of the larger differentiations between our scores so far.
But I think I hear you, and I want the same right to change my score, but I have a feeling that I might down my score after watching it again. Usually it's the other way around. I think this movie might like there's a couple scenes in the third act where they're just like, what the hell moments? What were you thinking creatively? Like, why you think this would fit in that movie? Like, I don't know, besides like the wackiness of it. I think it might not age particularly well.
I'm not sure how it's going to age because like I already talked about the analysis for cinephiles. They're going to like to nitpick this movie. And I think it has a lot of cool Easter eggs in this movie that you'll catch the second time that you might appreciate, like the effort by the efforts from Ari Aster the second time. So I'm thinking like I might like it more, to be honest.